Hey everyone, it's Daniel from Voiceflow, and in this video, we're going to be building an AI assistant using Perplexity. Now, if you're not aware, Perplexity is a model that uses real-time information in summarizing its answers. So this is perfect if you have an assistant that requires real-world information like an investment advisor, a travel advisor, or anything else that you can think of where it's useful to be able to search through recent events and translate those into an AI response. So it's a pretty simple project. What it's doing is it's taking a question like, what were Tesla's most recent earnings? It's sending that over to Perplexity. So it's using their API to be able to search the web and assemble an answer. And then from that, what I'm doing is I'm taking this answer that it was just provided, and I'm actually using a different model to be able to generate a follow-up question and adding that into a button. So now a user can go ahead and actually type question follow-up, or they can go ahead and just click this and it'll send this follow-up question back to Perplexity and answer it. So it creates a really good experience, very similar to the Perplexity UI, where you ask a question and it presents you with different follow-ups that you can get into. Now, before we hop in, it's important to know that Voiceflow is a tool to build medium to high complexity AI assistants. So if you're looking to be able to combine different models together, create complex conversational paths, pull in information from your backend services, and then connect to either a chat interface or a custom front end, Voiceflow is a tool for you. It's incredibly powerful, especially if you're working with a developer. So let's hop in and do this step by step. Here's what my Voiceflow assistant looks like. Now, the key to this is that we're using a function that's called Perplexity. So in Voiceflow, you can use functions, which are basically chunks of code, to be able to do things like make API calls, run JavaScript, transform information. And so in this function, what we're doing is we're mapping a lot of the inputs we're getting from Voiceflow into an API call that is going to Perplexity. And then we're being able to get the results and then actually rendering a text step in Voiceflow all within this function. Now, you don't have to code this from scratch. You can go ahead and download it in the link below. And all you have to do is just go to import and then import the function, and you'll be able to drag it out onto your canvas just like a step. So these are useful for connecting to any sort of internal tools. And we have a whole bunch of pre-built ones that you can find on our page here. So ones like calling Mistral 7XB, pulling from a Google Sheet, sending a message via Twilio, Segment, a whole bunch of different things. So if I'm on a blank canvas here, I want to start off with just a couple simple steps. So let's start off with the text step, which is welcome. Then we're going to go ahead and take a capture step. So the capture step just takes whatever the user's typing and saves it into a variable. So in this case, I want to save it to a variable called question. Next up is where we're going to use our function. So if I go over to the dev section here and drag out function, this is where I can use the Perplexity function that we just imported into Voiceflow. I'm going to link these up, and now I'm going to start actually mapping some of these variables. Now, before we dive into how this function works, let's take a look through the code of this function and understand how it was put together. So if I go over to my functions tab in here, you can see that a couple things are happening. So right off the bat, this top section here is where you actually define your input variables for the function. So the function is able to take inputs from your Voiceflow canvas. So you saw that I saved a variable called question on the canvas, and I'm able to actually map those to variables that this function uses. So on this top line, I'm defining a variable called input variables. And what I'm doing is I'm just assigning prompt model API key and max token to the values that were put in here. Next up is I'm just formatting them a bit by removing some extra spaces. And then I'm creating some error handling just in case some of these fields aren't filled out. So for example, if max tokens isn't actually filled out, so user didn't put the max tokens, we're just going to default it to 0. And we're going to do the same thing with the model. So here, if the model isn't defined, because the user can do 7B or 7DB, we're just going to default it to the 7B model. Next, we're going to check for the API key. And you can see here that if the API key is undefined, so if there's no value for the API key, we actually want to pass back an error to the canvas using this return function. And so what the return function is doing is it's able to pass back an output variable. So you can see the output variable here called error. So error will be filled with, please provide your API key. I have a path called error. So I create a path on the canvas that I can link somewhere. And this trace type is really cool because it allows you to actually render a message on the Voiceflow front end. And so in this case, I'm going to render a debug message, and that's going to say no API key provided. And it won't show that to the end user, but when you're in debug mode, you'll be able to see that. Next up, I'm doing the same thing. I'm just checking for a prompt and handling the error path in the exact same way. Finally, this is the main section here where we are actually calling the Perplexity API. Now, hopping over to Perplexity's docs, this is their PPLX online API. So they have two models, the 7B and the 7DB model, that are both trained on up-to-date information and are able to actually answer questions that are provided to it. So to get your Perplexity API key, you're going to want to sign up for a Perplexity account. Then just go to your account settings, and in the API section here, your API key is listed. Heading back to the function, what we're doing is we're sending over the header for the function. And in the body, we're just kind of injecting the model. So 7B or 7dB, injecting max tokens, and then also including the prompt itself. So you can see here, the prompt is actually designed to be a question because that question is what Perplexity uses to search and actually return an answer with. Finally, at the end, assuming that this all goes well and there's no more errors, then we are able to return via this path here and actually output the answer via the output variable. So if you want to learn more about functions, again, just go ahead, hit the docs, and this will take you right to our functions documentation that'll explain how you can actually build a function. Now, going back to the canvas, now that we have a sense of what this is, let's start mapping some of these input variables. So for the prompt, we're going to use the question that we just saved. For the model, let's go with 70B for the purpose of this demonstration. For API key, I'm going to add in my API key, and for max tokens, we're going to go 1024. And for answer, we're going to output it to a variable called answer. And if you don't have that already, you can just create one. But that's pretty much it for us to get started. I'm going to add in my API key here, and then we're going to keep going. Cool. So now that we've got this, let's go ahead and actually test this out. So let's say, what was the most recent earnings for test? And great, we were able to get a response right off the bat, and that was able to render the actual response in its own text step. So there's nothing else that we need to do, but now we can start actually building the rest of the flow here to kind of build a better user experience. So to handle some of these errors, I'm just going to say if there's no question, we're just going to take them back here. And if there's no answer provided by the API, I might have an error message to say, I couldn't find an answer for that, ask another question. Next up, let's handle the success path. So what I want to do now is I want to move forward to the next part of the conversation. So we've answered the user's question. And now for the next part, let's go ahead and actually go through that process of generating a follow-up question that the user can use. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to drag out a step called the set AI step. Now in Voiceflow, what's really cool is we have some built-in AI steps where you can use a variety of different models. And so you can start having multiple different AI calls to multiple different models within your assistant that all do different things. So it's kind of like having many assistants in one. Now I'm going to call this one question generator. And what it does is it's going to generate a follow-up question from what the user asked and what the Perplexity responded with. You can see here my prompt, I've said generate a follow-up question based on the user's question and then the answer they received. So this is going to be passed to GPT 3.5 and it's going to generate a follow-up question. I'm also just going to specify only return question. Great. Now what we're going to do is we're going to save this to a variable. So a user will never see what comes out of this, but we're going to save it to a variable on our end. So I'm just going to go ahead and save it to the question variable. So we're going to overwrite the initial one, and it's going to be filled with the new follow-up question. Next up, we are going to use the button step here. And for the button, we're actually going to input that follow-up question. So we're going to use a variable and fill it here. And just in case a user doesn't actually click that button and they just type something, we're going to go ahead and create a path called a no match path that is going to go back to the Perplexity model here. But we want to make sure that whatever they typed is going to get saved into that question variable. So I'm going to add a set step here, and we're going to say that apply to question. We're going to say last utterance. So last utterance is a variable that is automatically saved in Voiceflow. It's whatever the user has said last. So you kind of break down what's happening here. We are able to capture a user's question. We send that to Perplexity, and then Perplexity answers the question. And then using that answer, we generate a follow-up question and display that question above. And if a user decides to click it, then we just send that question to Perplexity. If not, and if they decide to type something instead, well, we still save that and we send it to Perplexity as well. So let's just organize this a bit so it's a bit less chaotic. Okay, so we've cleaned up some of the lines here, just giving it a bit of color so you can understand what's happening. And this allows us to just be able to follow the flow of it in terms of the success paths here and then the error paths. What I've done here is I'm just using an action. So if a user decides to type instead of pressing the button, we're going to save their question to last utterance, and then we're just going to go back to the answer question step here. So now let's go ahead and give this a whirl and see if it works. Say something like, what were Nancy Pelosi's most recent trades? And you can see I got answer here, but these looks like they're all from 2022, or I got 2023 over here. And let's ask a follow-up question and see if this goes through. And great, it was able to process that follow-up question and then actually return with an answer here, which is pretty solid. Great. So that's how you use it in Voiceflow. And that's it. So go ahead, check out that functions library. If you have any questions, you can join our Discord, and we've got tons of thousands of, if you got any questions, you can join Discord. We've got thousands of users in there who are constantly building and kind of sharing what they're creating. So that's all. My name is Daniel. I will see you in the next build. Here's what my Voiceflow assistant looks like. So it's going to use a Perplexity function that you can download in the comments and just add into your project. But the end result looks a bit like this. What were Tesla's most recent earnings? Now, what it's going to be able to do is it's sending this question to Perplexity, searching the web, and assembling an answer to respond for me. So you can see here, it's talking about Tesla's fourth quarter earnings, and just they had a decrease in revenue. And so if I go ahead and actually click this, what I've done is I've used AI to generate a follow-up question that a user can click and get an answer. So this makes it easier to be able to help guide the conversation and help users figure out what question to ask next. So that's a quick overview. Now let's actually dive into how you can build this using Voiceflow functions over here. We're going to walk through what this function is and how it works. And then we're also going to talk through how to generate that follow-up question that I showed you earlier. Feel free to skip ahead to the parts that you want to dive into. You can also go check out our docs on functions to learn more, but let's dive in.